I was driving home from a late shift around 2 in the morning when my usual route was blocked by highway maintenance. So I let my GPS reroute me down a series of back roads I had never taken before. At first, everything seemed normal, just dark stretches of pavement surrounded by dense tree liens. But after about 20 minutes, the voice on the navigation app began making subtle errors, telling me to turn on to dirt cutoffs that did not exist and announcing street names that made no sense. I kept driving, assuming it was a simple signal glitch, until the blue route line on the screen suddenly recalculated and directed me down an unmarked gravel lane branching off into the woods. The moment my headlights hit the gravel, the road felt older than anything around it, overgrown with tall grass down the center seam and completely shadowed by overhanging branches. I checked the screen again and noticed the glowing dot representing my car was hovering in total black space, moving further away from any mapped road. But the ETA timer kept ticking down as if I was approaching a real destination. I told myself to just pull a 3-point turn and head back, but when I looked into my rearview mirror, the headlights only illuminated a thick, gray mist that seemed to have rolled in right behind my car, completely swallowing the entrance I had just driven through. With no room to turn around on the narrow path, I had no choice but to keep moving forward at 5 miles an hour. Every few hundred feet, the trees on the left side of the road showed strange pattern changes, cleared out in neat, identical square patches where nothing grew, almost like house foundations that had been wiped clean. I stared at the message, afraid to move, when a quiet, deliberate knock sounded against the rear passenger window of my car, followed 3 seconds later by the soft, distinct sound of gravel crunching underfoot right outside my door. I held my breath, keeping my eyes fixed straight ahead on the dark road, praying that whatever was standing out there would assume the car was empty. But the cold air inside the cabin grew so thick I could see my breath, and the navigation voice whispered one final prompt through the dead car speakers, saying, "You are being watched." I sat frozen until the first pale light of dawn finally bled through the trees hours later, at which point the car started on the very first turn of the key, as if nothing had ever been wrong. I drove out of those woods and made it home, but every time I start my car at night now, the GPS screen flickers once before loading, and the blue marker always defaults to that empty grid, waiting for me to turn back around. That was when I noticed the dashboard clock was frozen at 2:47 a.m., and the digital display for the outside temperature began dropping rapidly, 1 degree every few seconds, despite it being mid-July. I turned off the radio to hear better, and in the sudden silence of the cabin, the GPS speaker crackled to life again. But this time it did not give a direction. It played a muffled, rhythmic tapping sound, followed by a faint sound like someone taking a deep breath right next to a microphone. I stared at the phone mounted on my bed, and the screen flashed red for a single frame before returning to the blank grid map, showing a single red marker fixed exactly 200 yards ahead of me. I slowed down to a crawl, my high beams cutting through the haze, until the lights reflected off something standing by the shoulder of the gravel road. It was a metal street lamp, rusted and crooked, glowing with a faint, flickering amber light even though there were no power lines attached to it anywhere. As I passed directly under the lamp, my car engine sputtered and died completely, the power steering going heavy in my hands as the vehicle coasted to a stop in absolute dark. I tried turning the key, but the battery was entirely dead, leaving only the faint illumination of my phone screen on the dash. I sat there in the dark listening to the hot engine pinging in the cool air, waiting for my eyes to adjust, when the GPS screen lit up once more with a new notification that simply read, "Destination reached." It started with the third light pole on my street, the one directly opposite my bedroom window, flickering 3 times every night at precisely 3:17 a.m. I only noticed because I was working late on a project, but once you see a pattern that clean, it sticks with you, drawing your eyes back to the glass night after night. By the 4th week, the pattern shifted and the lamp didn't just flicker. It went entirely dark for 6 seconds, and during those 6 seconds, the silhouette standing under the fixture wasn't a shadow cast by the concrete pole, but something tall and impossibly narrow, standing facing away from my house. It had a rule, or at least it seemed to. It never moved while the light was off, but every time the bulb sputtered back to life, its position had shifted by a single inch toward my curb, its heels leaving thin, compressed grooves in the wet asphalt that remained long after sunrise. I started keeping a journal on my nightstand, documenting the exact millimeter changes, trying to convince myself it was an optical illusion or a trick of the sodium bulb. Until the night, I left my window cracked open and realized the air coming off the street tasted faintly of burnt copper and damp wool. By the second month, it had crossed the street entirely and was standing on my lawn, its face still completely obscured by the angle of its neck, which bent forward like a dry branch under heavy snow. The unsettling part wasn't that it was approaching, but that my dog never barked at it, instead lining up at the foot of my bed, staring at the closed bedroom door in silence, his chest rising and falling in sync with the rhythmic hum of the transformer outside. Last Thursday, the figure reached the porch stairs, and for the first time, I heard it make a sound. Not a breath or a footstep, but the distinct, dry click of a light switch being flipped inside an empty wall. I haven't slept in my bedroom since, choosing instead to stay in the hallway where the windows don't reach. Lee.